But they're all going to be self-sufficient, not going to need any federal assistance, not going to need any special care, not going to need health care, food stamps, federal housing subsidies, none of it. They're going to come and go right to their job at Google. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. My voice is quite low because of my throat issue. I like coffee with character. I am Lauren Bacall when I get... I am turning into... It's Lauren Bacall crossed with something else. I'm not sure, but we'll get through the show somehow.
Crossed with John Wayne. It's a little low this morning.
Isn't that awful? It's horrible. What can I do?
Welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show.
It's like Teddy Pendergrass here. It's a little low. So I have so much to get into. This traveling caravan of immigrants.
Asylum seekers.
Oh, sorry. Asylum seekers are now in Tijuana. And this is not the only caravan. When did we start calling it a caravan to make it sound more fun? Caravan's like, oh, it's a caravan. It's like a road trip. Right. It's like, oh, there was just the road tripping to the United States. Why don't we we should do a reality show. I'm surprised they haven't done a reality show on the migrant crossings. And the media are once again celebrating this as this is what makes America great. It's not rebuilding our economy and having a smarter trade policy, increasing the standard of living for Americans. That's not what makes America great, and our freedom and our rule of law and our culture. No. It's an open borders world that will help make America better, more pure in their utopian vision. So when hundreds and hundreds of people just storm the border, I mean, life can't get much better for the liberals when that happens. I mean, that's just their idea of, thank God we're going to replace these old white men. Thank God these old racist white men and women, these hicks from the Midwest, we have to replace them because they are just they're not hip to what's really going on now. They're not thinking straight. Those people support Trump. So we need new voters. We got to get them in. And so the media are just glowing in their reports as if they know the background of every single migrant. Well, they're just fleeing violence in their home country. Well, if that's the standard, get ready for like 1 billion people to come here.
We are at the shelter for the organization Juventud 2000 in Tijuana. You can see the tents that they have set up. I'm told that there are a few buses on the way, about 130 women and children that will be staying in Tijuana, waiting for the rest of the group to make its way up, and then at some point expected to go to the port of entry, so over to San Diego, to turn themselves in to authority and seek asylum in the United States of America.
One federal judge in the District of Columbia, one judge manages to stop the president's decision to do away with DACA, to end what I think it's in International Business Times refers to as the immigration program known as DACA. The decision was made by this judge who was appointed by a Bush, George W., John Bates, said the Department of Homeland Security's explanation for ending DACA was, quote, too flimsy and ultimately unpersuasive. Okay, so now he's just a pundit. I mean, that is not the standard that you use. It has to be arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary and capricious. The standard for calling a duly enacted executive order or a federal regulation is not, it's flimsy. That's not a constitutional standard. His 60-page opinion, so he can be a hero at like Congressional Country Club over the weekend. So, hey, John, thanks. Chevy Chase Club. He goes, and he gets all the slaps on the back. Thanks, man. Thanks for what you did to resist Trump in that opinion. 60-page blather. He says DACA's rescission was arbitrary and capricious because the department failed adequately to explain its conclusion that the program was unlawful, Obama's initial program. Neither the meager legal reasoning nor the assessment of litigation risk provided by DHS to support its rescission decision is sufficient to sustain termination of the DACA program. So now we have federal judges who are aiding and abetting the lawlessness of the old administration. So you have old administration officials like Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. Those guys were trying to thwart Trump on one level with the DOJ investigation, with the Mueller investigation, with McCabe. So they were working on in one way. Then you have the federal judiciary. This guy's probably I just guess he's like a never Trumper in his heart, because this decision is ridiculous. The president has every authority under the Constitution to make a decision based on what is in the national security of this country, the national security interest and the economic interest of this country. The president of the United States under Obama did not have the authority, sua sponte, to just declare that millions of people are here suddenly legally. Oh, you're all legal. You can all work. That's a legislative role. That's a decision to be made by the legislature. So it was about time that the administration had said, which Congress, remember Congress didn't do this? Congress didn't act. Congress said, oh, let's leave it to the courts. How many times did we hear John Boehner, when he was still Speaker, say, "Oh well, we didn't act on this because this is working its way through the judicial process." I believe Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell both said that. What did they both do on the same thing on Defense of Marriage Act? Remember that? They said, "Oh well, no, the courts will ultimately uphold the Defense of Marriage Act during the gay marriage thing." Remember, they didn't want a constitutional amendment. Phyllis Schlafly said, "You got to do a constitutional amendment. These judges are going to overturn the will of the people here. Your duly passed law." Well, in this case, they didn't do anything. They didn't pass a law, overturning the president's decision. And now another federal district court judge, one guy, is able to put a halt to what the president decided. Meaning, in 90 days, because he gave it a 90-day implementation period and gives the administration another chance to come forward with better reasoning. At that point, the president will have to start processing DACA applications, more people coming to the United States. How many of you agree with me that Congress must pass a new statute circumscribing the jurisdiction of the federal courts, which they can do under our Constitution? In other words, a single judge, one district court judge, would not then have the power to deem a law unconstitutional on his own that would affect the whole country. In other words, it would get kicked right up to the circuit court. So at least you have three judges who are true experts in constitutional law. Remember, district court judges, their main job is to apply the sentencing guidelines. I mean, these are not constitutional scholars. The circuit court judges are much better in being equipped to analyze the constitutionality of an issue. That's why you don't see district court judges hopping to the Supreme Court. A lot of times district court appointments are just their favors. Chuck Schumer gets one and Trump gets one, and it's like horse trading with the district court appointments. So one judge should not be able to stop a federal action on his own or her own. How many of you agree with me on that? This is an outrage. 855-40-LAURA. Jonathan Turley was on today. Was he on MSNBC? Morning Joe. Do we have the soundbite?
What's interesting about the decision on DACA is that this was a Republican appointee who simply sort of threw up his hands. And it's a familiar refrain where he said, look, you're not giving me what you need to give me to uphold this action. The administration has a great deal of deference under cases like Chevron. Right. You don't have to do much, but they're not doing it.
What do you mean they're not doing it? I'm going to go through the administration's justification. Here's the justification. We're doing away with DACA because it was unlawfully implemented in the first place by President Obama. And it is in my best judgment as president, to protect this country and our people, is to say we will not legalize 1.8 million people who came here illegally, because we don't know enough about these people. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. The President of the United States has a solemn duty to defend our country, and our borders, and our economy, everything about our people.
And he vowed to do this at the start. This was a crucial and central point and talking point throughout the campaign.
Outrageous.
And remember, we should remind people, Barack Obama passed DACA, whether you like it or you don't like it. He passed it via executive order.
Right.
He insinuated it on the body politic without the consent of Congress or the governed. You can't do it that way. It's unconstitutional. So rather than address that, the primordial issue here, which is, was the DACA program established in the way it should have been and by the appropriate branch of government, we now find ourselves in word games with the Trump administration over this.
855-40-LAURA. Well, this is why Robert Bork, Judge Bork, did a lot in his career to discuss the out-of-control judiciary. And he said the only way that the people are truly going to be free and be able to govern themselves and rule themselves, determine their own destiny, is to limit the jurisdiction of the federal courts, because they are acting unlawfully, and these plaintiffs or these petitioners forum shop, so they feel like they have a better chance of getting either a moderate Republican judge or a Obama or Clinton appointee. So they just forum shop. That's why you had the judge in Brooklyn, and that's why you had the judge in San Francisco ruling on this before. Turley said this as well.
It's sort of like the first travel ban order, which was appalling. It was badly executed, badly drafted, badly defended. Well, this judge in DACA said, look, it's not that hard to come up with a rationale, but you need to give me one.
855-40-LAURA. We're going to take a break. I'm going to get a glass of water. We have Arthur Andrew coming up. He's going to talk about where this leaves the country. In the meantime, he was a former immigration judge, and he's going to tell us what happens when the hundreds of illegal immigrants, with the sob stories that the media are publicizing morning, noon, and night. They never do the. What are the sob stories about Middle America? It's always the sob stories about the illegals. In CNN and CBS, they're just shameless, absolutely shameless. So he's going to talk about how easy it is once someone claims asylum for them to just disappear into the United States, and how many are in the asylum backlog. This number will shock you. Again, I want to hear from you on this. Judges acting against the will of the people. They do not care. Some of these judges do not care about the rule of law. They believe that we're too stupid and that we should be ruled by them, by the men in the black robes. Oh, you want to throw that around, Nancy? Music was a little loud there, James. I got it. Nancy Pelosi is now casting aspersions on those of us who go to church. We go to Mass, Nancy. We go to Mass on Sunday, and yet we're just so mean to the immigrants on Monday. You want to go there? You support Planned Parenthood Monday through Sunday, and you go to church on Sunday. So you support the slaughter of babies in the womb, and I can't question whether someone confesses that on a regular basis, but I hope so. Think about that. Wow, she's pretty gutsy to be going out there questioning people's faith now. Oh, I think that might be something we have to tackle tonight on Seen and Unseen and the Raymond Arroyo segment on the Ingraham angle. That's wild. We have a lot to get to on the Laura Ingraham Show. This tyranny of the judiciary has got to stop. These judges are ruling you. They're ruling over you. They're not interested in the rule of law. They're interested in ruling over the people. And remember, they have life tenure. Except impeachment, there's nothing you can do to a judge. This is why Bork was genius. I love Scalia, but Judge Bork was brilliant because he saw this coming. You can't rely on these life tenured judges who are living in their bubble to do the right thing too often, do the right thing when it comes to the Constitution. You just can't. Let's go to Carl in California, line 5. Carl, welcome.
Okay.
Carl, you there? Let's go to Jeff in Texas, line 4. Jeffy.
And can a current president, by executive order, cancel out a previous president's executive orders?
Well, that's what he was doing. That's what he was doing in the action. He was rescinding DACA. So that's what he did. So in effect, Jeff, the district court judge here, which is a George W. appointee, John Bates, what he was doing was saying, well, right now the Obama executive order to essentially give citizenship, de facto citizenship, to 1.8 million people, that's constitutional. So it's constitutional to do that, but it's not constitutional to say, wait a second, in my view as President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, we cannot reward this illegal behavior and bestow work permits and a de facto citizenship. Remember, he stopped short of saying it was citizenship, Obama, in the original DACA order. It was you can work and stay here without fear of deportation. So it was creating a separate class of people by executive order. That's what the judge is, by implication, saying that that's okay. You're listening to your Healthy Radio Addiction. More on this with a former immigration judge. We come back.
1-855-40-LAURA.
Good day, sunshine.
Giving your home a fresh new look this year, it can seem like a daunting task. I get it. But with SelectBlinds.com, it really doesn't have to be. Select Blinds makes it easy to install and score huge savings on blinds. And after saying goodbye to those old dusty blinds, shades, or the shutters, you're going to wonder why you didn't upgrade sooner. It adds an aesthetic to your rooms, to your house, that you just can't beat anywhere else. SelectBlinds.com. Select and order high-quality, easy-to-install blinds, shades, and shutters. Don't be intimidated by installation. It's really not hard at all. And with products you've seen on all your favorite home improvement shows, well, SelectBlinds.com, it's become an interior makeover essential. And they take the guesswork out of ordering blinds online, and the high-quality blinds you'll get for an unbelievable price. And you go and you see the 5-star ratings on SelectBlinds.com. These are real ratings, not fake-a-roonies. So all you need to do, again, you'll see the million satisfied customers. That's what they have now. It's stunning. SelectBlinds.com. Remember, always mention the Laura Ingraham Show using that drop-down menu. Again, let SelectBlinds.com upgrade your home today at SelectBlinds.com. 855-40-LAURA. Art Arthur is joining us now for Center for Immigration Studies, former immigration judge. This doesn't surprise me, Art, because I do believe we have the tyranny of the judiciary that we're seeing right now. There's a resistance to Trump in Congress. There's a resistance to Trump in the media. And indeed, in pockets of the judiciary, there's a resistance to Trump. And they will deem pretty much everything he does, if they disagree with the underlying policy, arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah, and they do it in language that is, often quite intemperate. The Fourth Circuit decision in particular that addressed the second executive order, if I had written something like that as an immigration judge, the circuit court would have come back and said this man needs to be removed from the court because he obviously lacks judicial temperament. It was a screed. It was a scream in the middle of the night, not a judicial opinion worthy of a circuit court.
It's 60, but let's get back to the district court judge in D.C., John Bates. This is a 60-page opinion, and he gives the administration 90 days to provide a fuller explanation for the rescission of DACA. So the president said, because Congress, again, didn't do its job and have a legislative rescission, but the court says, well, it's too thin and flimsy, the justification.
And, what's really exceptional about the DACA program to begin with is the Democratic Congress, in which they had 59 senators, were not able to get the DREAM Act passed. And so the president, somewhat arbitrarily, and not even through executive order, but through a memo issued by the Secretary of Homeland Security, creates this program, and all of a sudden a D.C. District Court judge says, nope, set in stone, you're going to have to come up with a good reason for undoing it. It not only is it exceptional, but it actually, calls into question the ability of future presidents to undo anything that President Trump is doing that they don't like. I mean, the precedent for this is horrible, and it is such an extreme use of power. I hope that the Justice Department appeals this immediately to the D.C. Circuit and to the Supreme Court. I mean, all of this nonsense needs to end. I think that we've seen in the Supreme Court's orders and the travel ban that, they're starting to get fed up with intemperance.
Well, yeah. Well, my view on this, and again, for people who are just tuning in, Art Arthur is a former immigration judge at the Center for Immigration Studies. He was on the Ingraham Angle last night. It was a terrific segment. What he's saying is, remember, when Obama did this, and I want to make sure I'm stating this correctly, it was not an executive order. It was a memo that he wrote to DHS. Correct, Art?
Yeah, it was actually a memo that was written by the secretary of DHS. It wasn't even the president had made an announcement that this would happen, but it was Janet Napolitano herself who actually issued the memo that created this, and did it as an exercise of prosecutorial discretion. Look, I've been a prosecutor in the past too. Prosecutorial discretion is when you decide not to push a case too hard, not to grant benefits to 800,000 individuals who are illegally present in the United States and who Congress has said should be removed from the United States.
Well, and what also is possible, and this is where we were talking about Robert Bork, Judge Bork, and his writings and speeches about the need to limit the authority for constitutional review of the federal courts in certain areas. And the idea that one district court judge should be able to stop the federal government, like stop it in its tracks, is outrageous. I mean, so you have these people just forum shopping. That can't be. And I think it has to be immediately kicked up to the circuit court, where we have people who are actually constitutional law experts, at least nominally experts, instead of some just district court judge whose job is to apply the sentencing guidelines 5 days a week.
Absolutely, and what happens in these cases is you actually have district court judges who I'm sure were perfectly fine lawyers in their personal lives making decisions that directly impact the national security of the United States. That's what's going on in the travel ban order. That's what they're going to talk about before the Supreme Court today. And in the DACA cases, you're continuing a program that, quite frankly, is probably illegal. The Department of Justice has determined that there was no authority to do this, that it was illegal when it was done. This is very similar to the DAPA case that Judge Andrew Hannon decided in Texas, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and evenly divided Supreme Court sustained the Fifth Circuit injunction. I mean, so something needs to be done. And in the Real ID Act, Congress attempted to strip the lower courts of as much authority as they could. But quite frankly, I don't think they went far enough. And I think that we need to come up with a scheme by which we can strip the district court judges. The worst case of this, of course, is the Flores decision, which is why we have thousands, hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied alien children coming over the border because they know they're going to get released. Judge Dolly G. in California issued that 21 years ago, and we're still living with the ramifications of it, and she continues to keep it going. One district court judge in one court, one place, making a decision that is, quite frankly, under the Constitution, left up to Congress.
So to go back and explain that. So that the Dolly, the Judge G, is it G-E-E? How do you spell the last name?
Yep, G-E-E. Yeah.
Okay.
She made certain findings, and as a result of those findings with respect to the detention of alien minors in the United States in 1997, pushed the executive branch into a settlement agreement under which minors would be released, and this has basically gone on through the courts for a number of years. And I believe in 2016, the Ninth Circuit said, look, one, this creates a presumption of release of alien minors, and two, not just of unaccompanied alien minors, but alien minors who come with their families. That's why we're seeing this huge influx of families and minors coming across the border, because they know that once they get here, the kids are going to get released, and if the kids get released, they're going to release the mom and dad too.
So this is why I love having you on, because there's so much happening in our politics, Art, that people don't realize this starts somewhere. It doesn't happen overnight. First of all, we had this mad rush across the border for the last 35 years after the 1986 Simpson-Mazzoli, or whatever it was, 1980. When was it? 86? 80?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, 86. So you had this mass, immigration amnesty, which sadly was not accompanied by enforcement. We didn't enforce our borders. People walked across our borders. We have no border wall. We had catch and release for many years. We still kind of have catch and release. And then people figure it out. Like everything else, they figure out how to game the system. And then you throw in these ridiculously activist federal judges, and you get a Democrat president, and then you're going to you're taken to the cleaners. So people have to understand this, and this is being aided and abetted by lawyers in the United States who work for these special interest open borders groups, and it's being aided and abetted by judges who refuse to do their job and who are essentially legislating from the bench. That's who they're being aided and abetted by, and various people like George Soros, I'm sure, is involved as well.
Yeah, and the fact is, and you can go back to Harry Reid. When they did away with the filibuster for these judges, they packed the courts with these activist judges. The Fourth Circuit used to be, a button-down state, we follow the law circuit, and today it is the Wild West. And again, the things that they say, Obama did that, and the things that they say, I would have been thrown off the bench for saying.
Oh no, it is. Okay, so the travel ban case being argued today at the court. Art, what is your sense on how this is going to go down? I mean, it's hard to tell from oral arguments, but you usually get a decent sense of where the court's thinking is. It's a revised travel ban. The president obviously believes that this is essential for American national security, but we have a evenly divided court on a lot of these issues. What's your sense?
My sense is that the Supreme Court is going to attempt to reset the balance as it relates to presidential authority over the enforcement of the immigration laws of the United States as written by Congress. At issue is Section 212F of the INA, which I don't need to get into, but it gives the president the authority to ban a group of aliens from the United States when their presence is detrimental to the interests of the country. That's really what the president is relying on. That's what Ronald Reagan relied on back when he did Proclamation 5517, which banned people from Cuba from coming to the United States, and there was no hue and cry about that. The argument on the other side has to do with Section 202 A1A of the INA, which is a non-discrimination provision that says you can't discriminate against people on the basis of nationality when issuing visas, not admitting them to the United States, but when issuing visas. So you have two provisions that appear to be in tension, but the fact is they've coexisted for years. And again, President Reagan used this, President Obama used 212F in certain instances, President Bush never challenged. But because it's Donald Trump and because Donald Trump had, made some statements about, danger to the United States from certain people entering, all those rules go out the window, and, judges can do what they want. And I think that the Supreme Court is going to return the balance and say 212F is straightforward, national security, we got to defer.
Well, thank God. Well, that better happen. We're going to discuss that tonight as well on the show. And again, just going back to what we were talking about initially with this deferred action for childhood arrivals and how we got how this became such a mad crush of illegals crossing our border. The judges have become so liberal, and Art pointed this out, that even the Obama administration is thwarted by the judges. So that Judge G in 2015, as Art said the Obama administration itself cannot can the Obama administration itself cannot detain children in at the border. So even Obama's too conservative for Judge G. Am I stating that correctly, Art?
That's absolutely right. And keep in mind, in 2014 and again in 2016, we saw what I would deem to be a humanitarian disaster. Yeah, a huge number of unaccompanied alien children showing up on the borders of the United States that, then got released. And quite frankly, 107,000 have been released since 2016 into the United States, not counting 167,000 family unit members who entered since 2000.
Okay, hold on a second. 107,000 of who was released?
Of the unaccompanied alien children, the UACs were released under the TVPRA, under the Flores Settlement Agreement, have been released into the interior of the United States. And of those UACs who have received orders, 66% of them have been ordered removed because they just never showed up in court.
And then there's 100 and something thousand of others. Are that their parents? What were you referring to in that next number?
167,000 family units. That's when you have a mom or a dad or a mom and dad showing up with their kids and getting released.
And this is over how much time? Since 2014?
Since 2016.
Oh, gee. Oh, my God. And that's not including just the regular people who cross the border.
That's not counting the regular people. And, when you look at the backlog of cases, 685,000 cases before the immigration courts right now, not counting 350,000 administratively closed cases, so it's really a million. But when you take a look at those numbers, you know how we got into this position because, there was lawlessness at the borders. The courts were not acting to give the Obama administration the authority to actually control the borders and detain these individuals in order to stop them from. And look, this goes both ways. One, you can. It's a huge number of people entering the United States illegally, but also we're encouraging people to undertake a very dangerous trip, through Mexico. And these smugglers are bad people. They rape, they rob, they kill, and they will hold for ransom these, children, adults, whoever. We had a stash house of 58 people in Laredo the other day that got raided. They will hold these people and demand ransom from their families in the sending country and in the United States in order to release them, or they will do the most horrendous things to them.
Oh my gosh! Well, Art, you're giving us a wealth of information. It is so. It's both depressing for our country, infuriating, and energizing because we have the information, we know what needs to be done, and we, the people, have to take our power back because these judges are taking our power away from us. They're disempowering voters. And this is what our framers worried about with an out-of-control judiciary, and we're seeing this in action, and it is reshaping the entire makeup of our country demographically, electorally, economically, and perhaps with dire national security consequences as well. That's what's happening with a runaway judiciary. Art Arthur, you're brilliant. Thank you so much for helping us understand all of this. We'll take a break. 855-40-LAURA. To this, as the court hears the travel ban case today, the president should not be thwarted in his efforts to keep this country safe. The executive authority should be preserved. Congress has to act to circumscribe this out-of-control judiciary's jurisdiction on these issues. Repository for everyone who has any type of economic concerns. The poll done of the Hondurans with their desire to come to the United States that I cited last night, their desires are based on economic concerns. They want a better economic future for their family. It's not based in what typically was considered a credible fear of persecution. But they mouth the platitudes about persecution because they're coached by American lawyers to do so. That's what's happening. American lawyers are holding seminars, large group seminars, for these people on buses and in camp areas where they're camping out in Mexico. Mexico deserves a lot of the blame for this as well. Mexico should stop these caravans and turn them right around and send them right back to Honduras. No, you don't have a temporary visa to travel through Mexico because your desire here is not credible based on any fear of persecution, because if it was, you would apply to us for asylum. But they're not. They're going right to the goose who laid the golden egg. They're going right to the land of opportunity and the land of a lot of benefits. That's where they're going to. They don't want to stay in Mexico. Fear of persecution. Oh, please. This is ridiculous. A lot to get to on the Laura Ingraham Show. 855-40-LAURA. One federal district judge in D.C. manages to try to completely change the way our president is dealing with this DACA situation. You've got to limit the jurisdiction of the courts. Remember, the answer to whether Congress can limit the jurisdiction of the courts is found in an examination of Sections 1 and 2 of Article 3 of the Constitution. Section 1 of the Constitution. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and this is the key part, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. And then Section 2, in all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all other cases, this is key, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. Congress has the authority to limit the lower court's jurisdiction. The Constitution is very clear on this. So it's well settled that the inferior federal courts are dependent on Congress for their existence and the powers that they exercise. You know, once in our early history, this law review article in I think it was Berkeley Law Review. In our early history, Congress actually abolished the inferior courts altogether. And in our own time, Congress abolished the U.S. state and certain United States circuit courts. So Congress has frequently limited the jurisdiction of inferior federal courts. It's time to get back to doing that. Really, I mean, this is doable, and I'm telling you, this is a winner. This is a winner. This is a winner issue for Republicans. Most people think our legal system is out of control. These judges are completely out of control. And it's about time that Congress steps in and says, no, we're not doing this. We're not doing this anymore.
This judge basically said a discretionary, policy-driven program of the Obama administration now has the force of law in the Trump administration. In my opinion, that is dead wrong. This was the discretion of the president when the president was Barack Obama. This president should not be compelled to continue the program.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. Of course, that's Judge Andrew Napolitano on Fox. So now saying that this is the equivalent of law. It wasn't even an executive action by Obama to start these deferred action for childhood arrivals. It was just basically a declaration from the Department of Homeland Security. So now that's the equivalent of law? You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. Let's go to Nancy in Virginia, line 4. Nancy.
Hey, how are you, Laura?
Good, thanks. Go ahead.
I'm here.
Yeah, go ahead, my friend.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty upset about this whole thing, this DACA, and we can't seem to overturn what Obama's done. Now, I thought he did a stroke of the pen, so I thank you for clarifying that. But he still had his cronies say, well, we're just going to let this happen. And so now all of a sudden they have all these rights, and they think they're privileged, and that anybody that goes against immigration is full of hate, and we're racist, and I'm really upset about it. And
join the club. We're all upset about it. And being upset about it is one thing. Having an answer is another. I just gave you an answer. I gave all of you an understanding of this. You're not going to get anywhere else on radio today. The Congress has the power to limit the jurisdiction of the inferior courts, and we've done so throughout our history. At various points in time, we've abolished entire classes of lower courts. And we have the power to do this again. But this is where we need real leadership in Congress. So instead of focusing on spending money on stupid programs, and instead of spending and wasting our time figuring out ways to keep these people in the United States, Congress should be going coast to coast. We should have leadership in Congress who makes this a priority. Make it a priority. Limit the jurisdiction of these out-of-control lower courts. And again, it goes all the way back to that Judge Dolly G. in California, who initially in 1997 forced the U.S. government, again, this was the Clinton administration. This is how liberal they are, forcing the Clinton administration into a settlement agreement about how you detain these unaccompanied minors, these children at the border. So one judge in California essentially was able to legislate from the bench U.S. immigration detention policy, and then it got worse in 2015 during the height of the crisis at the border, where a class action lawsuit was filed against the Obama administration, and Judge G said, no, you got to let all these people go. You can't detain them. You got to let them all go. So we, as our last guest said, Art Arthur, former immigration judge, we released 107,000 unaccompanied minors, UAMs is the acronym, back into the United States since 2016, and 167,000 family units into the United States. Overwhelmingly, they don't show up for their immigration hearing. 66% of them, he said, are ultimately adjudged to be deportable. Should be higher, but at least 66% were judged deportable, but they don't ever show up for their hearings. They're not deported. That's how it works. Oh, my God, it's a scandal. Our framers would just... can you imagine what they'd think today, what's happened to us? Let's go to Mike in Maine. Mike wants the military to airlift these people back home. Sounds good to me. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Laura, listen, this is a federal operation now. And not only is the National Guard involved, but the Air National Guard is involved. So in my opinion, what they need to do is roll out the C-130s and put them on standby. And they need to hand out color-coded cards to each one of these people by, nation of origin, whatever color. Load them up, notify the countries that they're on their way back, and any country that refuses to take them, all foreign aid will stop immediately.
I agree. This is an emergency. I agree. This is a national emergency, Mike. National emergency. We cannot, and also we have to remind everyone that we are fomenting the humanitarian crisis because we have allowed people with our idiotic laws, we've allowed people to game the system and think they can come in, so they risk life and limb to try to get here. So we have some of the responsibility here, and yes, endangering the lives of these people. The drug cartels are helped by this. The human traffickers make money off this, and we as a country are aiding and abetting it. And these judges are supremely at fault, aiding and abetting by implication the human traffickers and the drug smugglers, and then causing humanitarian problems along the way. It's just, I agree. It is a humanitarian disaster, but we can't allow it to continue, and it's a national security concern for our people now as well. Let's go to Ralph in Florida, line 4. Ralph.
Yes. What I wanted to ask you is, don't you think that the Republicans would be in a really strong political position if they would just point out that if the Democrats take to Congress, take over the federal government, we will have a sanctuary country instead of be dealing with a few sanctuary states?
Right. Well, yeah, it'll all look like California without the beautiful beaches. It'll all look like California. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. We appreciate that call. Coming up, the woman of the moment. She won that special election in Arizona. Debbie Lesko is going to join us. And she's made already an important announcement about with whom she'll caucus when she arrives on Capitol Hill. We'll talk to Debbie and a lot more. So a Republican wins a special election in Arizona, and the Democrats say this is a bad sign for Republicans. You can't even make this up. Joining us now, Debbie Lesko, who's about to be sworn in as the new congresswoman from the 8th District, this seat that was vacated by Trent Franks. Debbie, you can't make this up, but they're saying it's a win, but it's not really a win. It's a sign of a blue wave.
Well, hi, Laura. Of course they're going to say that. They would have said that no matter how much I won by. But, it's a great day. It's kind of surreal. I'll be sworn in soon and be the next congresswoman for Arizona, and it's a really great feeling. And I'm going to continue to work hard to make sure that we win by even a bigger margin in November.
Well, Trump won the district by 21 points in 2016. How much did you win by?
I win so far by about 5 or 6 points, so I don't know
why
what the
such a small margin? I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here. 21 points to 5 points? That's kind of brutal.
Who knows for sure, but I think one of the reasons was my Democrat opponent spent $1 million alone on negative TV ads against me. She just was pummeling me with false ads. Even our local major newspaper here said they were stretched the truth and were flatly false, and she just kept lying about me, quite honestly.
But of the early ballots, 49% were registered Republican. Only 28% were registered Democrat.
I know.
But that would indicate, again, I'm just doing the math here. That would indicate that you would have had a bigger margin of victory. And then again, those are the early ballots. But did you have any idea what the registration was for those who actually turned out yesterday?
I don't. I was so busy yesterday. I was at the polling places and talking to voters and then had the election night party last night, so I haven't looked at all the details. But I am happy that I won. Obviously, Republicans need to work very hard this year, as we have in previous years, but the Republicans need to get motivated. This is a different year than other years. I think it's natural that the Democrats want to take back the majority, just like the Republicans wanted to when the Democrats were in majority. Yep. So we need to get energized. I think in Arizona we are energized, but we have to get more energized.
So your opponent in the race, that Hiral Tipperini, did not support building the wall, of course, wanted citizenship for dreamers. You obviously support the wall against this mass amnesty. And you made an announcement already about joining the Freedom Caucus. Tell us about it.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm a conservative Republican, and I believe in lower taxes, less government regulations, lower deficit, lower debt, and securing the border, most definitely. That's very important to the people in Arizona because we have hundreds and thousands of people pouring over our border, and we don't know who's crossing it, lots of drugs. It's an important issue. I agree with President Trump and the Republicans that we need to build a wall as part of the solution. And like you said, my Democrat opponent didn't want to put one penny towards that.
What about this caravan of people who's already parked in Tijuana? And I guess we get hundreds of people who are going to suddenly claim asylum from Honduras. What do we do with them?
Well, I'm not an expert at it, but I sure am glad that we have President Trump in charge because he wants to stop them so they don't cross our border, and I agree with them. I'm a strong supporter of enforcing our immigration laws. We cannot just let people come across our border, and then, as in California, we want to give them driver's license and get them registered to vote.
The problem is we have to change the. Yeah, the problem is the laws. We have a lot of problems with the way the laws are written. And the way the system is gamed now by people who just recite the talking points given to them by lawyers who are these open borders advocates who just tell them, this is what you say. You have a credible fear of persecution in your home country. Talk about how you're worried about the gangs and talk about how you're worried about the drugs and that you need to be in the United States because you'll be persecuted for a variety of things, LGBT, you're persecuted for being a woman, you're persecuted for, whatever it is, religious grounds. And they know how to recite the script. So a lot of this needs, just regular enforcement, but also we got judges we got to deal with who are part of the resistance, and we have laws that have to be tightened. Did you talk to Paul Ryan already? Did he give you a call? You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. Looks like we might have lost Debbie, or we've lost the connection altogether. I'm not sure. But we have a lot to get to. We're going to talk more about what this all means as the MS-13 is still trying to sneak into the United States and they're posing as illegal immigrant children. This is another issue we've had to deal with. It's unbelievable. But getting back to this Lesko race, it's amazing to me that a Republican wins in an off-year election cycle as a special election, and the Democrats just trash it morning, noon, and night. I mean, if the shoe were on the other foot, they'd be saying, well, given the fact that it's an off-year election and, there's a lot of Trump resistance funding out there, it's amazing she even won it all. That, again, if it were a Democrat, they would just rewrite the narrative to fit whatever outcome they'd want. Ian Bremmer's going to join us. He has a really interesting new book called Us Versus Them, The Failure of Globalism. That's coming up in just a moment.
Some excerpts from the big state dinner yesterday and the meeting of President Macron of France and Donald Trump. Unexpectedly, this meeting went off without a hitch. In fact, it did look like an episode of The Odd Couple when they were getting along. We're joined now by Ian Bremmer. He is the editor-at-large and global affairs columnist at Time and author of the new book, Us Versus Them, The Failures of Globalism. Ian, thanks for being with us.
Happy to be with you.
Listen, tell me, first of all, your take on what we saw yesterday at the White House, Macron's visit. They're playing this off as a bromance, but there are some key challenges facing this relationship. I mean, Macron wants permanent exemptions from the president on those steel and aluminum tariffs. He wants a lasting commitment in Syria. He wants him to stay in the Iran deal. How do they get past the differences, and might the personal touch help smooth the way forward?
Well, I mean, talk about us versus them, and, you brought up the odd couple. Macron is like on globalists remaining.
Right.
He won on the back of open borders, free trade, stronger Europe, multilateralism. I mean, and just last week he said that in Europe there was basically a civil war going on. That's a direct quote from Macron, between the forces of liberalism and the forces of authoritarianism and illiberalism. And if he was being honest, he'd say the same thing about the United States, but he thinks Trump is on the other side of that. So, I mean, in terms of their actual policy orientations, they could not be farther apart, these two allies. And yet, as you mentioned, there's a good chemistry. The two men clearly like each other, and they see each other as potentially useful for themselves. And the trip that Trump had to Paris on Bastille Day went very well, and this first state dinner that Trump hosted for Macron, that's a big deal for any American president, and Macron certainly appreciated it. Now, I think the place where there's the biggest tension is on the Iran deal. And I think that Macron actually moved the ball a little bit. He definitely wants to find a way to get some more time. He's not going to be able to convince Trump to stick with the deal in May, but I think there's a good chance now, a reasonable chance, that Trump will say, "Okay, I'm gonna give it a couple more months. The May 12th deadline, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to get me a better deal on ballistic missiles, or get me a better deal on Iran's support for terrorism. And if you can do that, then I'll consider it. But otherwise, I'm gone." And it's not going to be a long time. And the bar is going to be high, because keep in mind, you don't have Tillerson and McMaster around anymore. You've got Pompeo coming in as Secretary of State. You've got John Bolton as National Security Advisor. You've got people around Trump that also want to rip up this deal. So this is a tough one, but I think that Macron's visit actually mattered.
We're talking to Ian Bremmer. He's the author of the new book, Us Versus Them, The Failures of Globalism. Well, when I picked up the book, all I kept thinking about was North Korea, and how the globalism, the globalists have for years attempted to restrain the Kim regime. They've been unsuccessful. What made Donald Trump successful in at least getting Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table, and why wasn't President Obama and others able to do this?
The reason Trump got them to the negotiating table is because he was willing to take a roll of the dice. He was much more risk acceptant. We've had presidents, Republican and Democrat, said, if we get this wrong, we're going to incinerate a lot of Koreans. Trump's more willing to take risks around that, but he's also more willing to see upside. And there's definitely upside. I mean, the fact that the North Koreans are engaged, the fact that they've already suspended their ICBM test, the fact that the Chinese have pushed them harder on sanctions, Trump gets credit for that. 100% he does. It doesn't mean we're going to get to a deal. But, the bigger point of this book on Us Versus Them is that so many of the things that the Americans have been promoting for decades now, the free trade, the Americans are going to lead the world, make a safer democracy, have our troops all over the world, and ensure stability, open borders, that really a growing number of Americans, maybe even a majority, just like a growing number of Europeans across the continent, say this isn't working for us anymore. And when Trump isn't just different on North Korea. When Trump says, "I want these 2,000 troops out of Syria," right? There's no one in the foreign policy establishment that was concerned about that. They're like, "No, we got to do this. Of course, we got to balance off the Russians, the rest." And Trump is saying, "Well, what about these 2,000 people? Like, members of the working class, those enlisted men and women and their families, they voted for Trump and Sanders. They did not vote for Hillary and Jeb. There's a reason for that. Decades of failed wars in Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're sick of it. And this is not going to be solved by Trump not being president anymore. This is a much, much deeper set of structural issues.
Ian Bremmer, tell us about what's happened, what we're seeing in Europe with the rise of these populist movements in Italy. I mean, in these most recent elections, you saw Berlusconi's party growing. What's happening? What are we seeing throughout Europe? Is this a wave? Is this something that is, and why hasn't it reached the shores of Germany yet?
It did. In Germany, Merkel has, despite the fact that the German economy is doing very well and German workers feel pretty good about the economy, very different from, sort of a lot of those other Europeans, still, Merkel barely was reelected, barely was able to form a government, much weaker than previous, and so she's got basically a lame duck. She can't build a stronger Europe the way Macron wants to. That's dead in the water right now, the French president's efforts. And for the first time since World War II, a nationalist party in Germany is in the Bundestag, is in the parliament. You need 5% to get in. They got 13%, and they've only grown since then. Now they're more popular than the Social Democrats in Germany. That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's
Ian, Ian, I'm having some trouble hearing you. You're garbling through our connection. We're going to try to reconnect with you so we can finish out our conversation. But no, it was fascinating watching yesterday. I don't know how many of you saw the welcoming ceremony on the South Lawn of the White House, but the chemistry between Trump and Macron and the touchy-feely, nature of this relationship, they are willing, at least as men, to reach out to one another in ways that, frankly, I've never seen two world leaders interact this way. I mean, you'd swear they were fraternity brothers. Very interesting connection. And as Ian Bremmer was saying a moment ago, there are deep differences. And, Macron in many ways represents the elites and the globalists throughout Europe. And yet, as he writes in the book, it's very interesting, challenging rights of elites, these leaders aren't arguing that government should be bigger or smaller, that it should tax less or spend more. They're challenging the rights of elites to make the rules that govern our lives. They tell citizens they've been cheated of their chance to succeed and that the media is in on it. They promise to comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable, and burn down the houses of power. That's in Ian Bremmer's book, Us Versus Them, The Failures of Globalism. And I got to tell you, it's a necessary and an important description, I think, of what we're dealing with here. And Ian's back on the line. You there, Ian?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
And
so
I'm
go
glad
ahead. You were talking about what we're seeing in Europe and in Germany, particularly, sort of the collapse of the globalist mentality is collapsing, even in places where the economy is thriving, like Germany.
Yeah, because Merkel said that she would take 1 million refugees from Syria, and I mean these were people that they were not going to integrate. They were not welcome from the German people. They didn't have the skills, and of course the Germans give these people enormous amounts of support. Which is money that a lot of Germans feel like is being spent out of their pockets. So, I mean, frankly, Merkel wanted Obama to help, and Obama said, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's not going to be popular here. That's well before America First and Trump. So, as a consequence, Merkel took a huge hit in those elections. This was a profound mistake. And in Italy, you asked me about Italy, the Northern League beat Berlusconi. This was among wealthy Italians in the north. It's poor in the south because the Northern League said, we're going to send back 600,000 refugees. We're going to deport all those Libyans that have come over to Italy. It's become the hottest issue in Italy, even though the Italian economy today is doing pretty good. So the idea that it's just about the economy and, well, let's give these guys some money and they'll shut up. We'll give them a tax break, they'll shut up. It's so much deeper than that.
Yeah, no, it's about culture. It's about the future of a people, and certainly in Italy, in Greece, we're seeing this all over the world. Really, they're suffering the consequences also of globalism in a profound way that the United States, perhaps hasn't had to confront. And it's extreme, and so they're taking extreme actions. Ian Bremmer, the book is Us Versus Them: The Failure of Globalism. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Talk to you soon. And we will continue in a moment. The Laura Ingraham Show continues. The number 855-40-LAURA, 855-40-LAURA. Coming up, Jonathan Keller, who's the president of California Family Council. He'll join us to talk about a new California law that's poised to ban books and speeches and even commercial services that might be perceived as anti-LGBT. We'll get to that when the Laura Ingraham Show continues. Stay right there. Now we understand Jim Acosta, who is the White House correspondent for CNN there, weighing in to Variety, and this is Raymond Arroyo sitting in for Laura Ingraham, weighing in to Variety on the problem as he sees it, which is that Americans are not in on the Donald Trump act. You see, it's all an act. And you just don't get it. The amazing thing here in all of this is you have these, I don't understand it, frankly. How can you have people covering a beat who are so aggressively critical? Look, I defend a journalist's right, and I say this all the time. We are members of the press, and a member of the press presses for answers. And to do that, you have to ask uncomfortable questions. That's part of the deal. So, whereas one should come as a journalist from an adversarial, you are coming from an adversarial posture, you don't need to be aggressive. And you don't have to make yourself part of the enemy. You're not an opponent, you're an adversary. But it's a genteel adversary. That's the posture that it should be, conducted with civility, and questions can be asked in a civil way, even probing difficult ones. And I defend everybody's right. As a journalist, we need journalists to ask those questions of all of our elected officials, whether it be the president or the Congress or the Senate or your local city councilman. They all need to answer the questions that the public has. The problem is when the press becomes part of the opposing political establishment, I think you get into a very dangerous place. And as Ian Bremmer was talking about a moment ago, these, new nationalists are rising up and saying, wait a minute, not only have the elites been selling you down the river legislatively, but the media's in on it. And it pains me to say people like Jim Acosta are giving credence to that because he's going on another platform and basically saying Donald Trump is an actor. This is all an act. The public isn't in on it. And in fact, the public is nuts. So your audience are filled with nutbags. Play that little clip again from Variety.
Mr. President-elect, can you give us a question?
Don't be rude. No, not that. From
people
Variety.
Around the country don't know it's an act. They're not in on the act. And they take what he says very seriously. And they take attacks from Sean Spicer and Sarah Sanders and what they do to us on a daily basis very seriously. They don't have all their faculties in some cases. Their elevator might not hit all floors.
Their elevator might not hit all floors. So the people that elected the president, a portion of Jim Acosta's viewing audience, the elevator just doesn't hit all floors. This is not only condescending to your audience, but condescending to the president as well. And I think it puts you in a bad position as a reporter who has to go into that press pen every day and sit in the briefing room. You've now made yourself a vocal opponent of the people you have to work with every day. And as others have proven, when you put yourself in that position, you're not going to get any answer, much less an answer you'd like. And I mean, making it seem as if Sean Spicer and Sarah Huckabee Sanders are, out there throwing invective at the press, I think they do take issue when issues are raised by the press that they don't like or in a way they don't like. But that's their job. And Acosta has his job, which is to ask questions and press for answers, but not to be abusive to the people he's covering or the audience he serves. And I do think that we've lost a lot. We've lost our bearings here as media on what our job is and our role. We're not elected officials. If Jim Acosta wants to cast himself as the resistance, he needs to go run for election. But he shouldn't browbeat the president or his audience. That could have ruinous outcomes. The Laura Ingraham Show continues in a moment. Stay right there. Raymond Arroyo sitting in for the great lady, and she'll be back. Stay here.